Wendell. What Wendell didn't mention was that both he and Joanne have been really intricate to making the foundation work. In fact, Wendell was there at the creation. Joanne was there at the creation of our famous ambassador program, which had 9 years running and more than 200 young people be part of it. So I just wanted to take just a few moments to tell you about what the foundation has been up to this year. It's been a whirlwind in Washington. That's all I can say about Taiwan. We kicked off the year with an event right here with Congresswoman Ileana Ross-Laitman, the chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee. We moved quickly to Washington for the first hearing on why Taiwan matters. And our esteemed guest today, Congressman Ed Royce, was at that hearing asking very tough questions and making statements about Taiwan's importance to the United States, particularly the importance of our economic relationship as well as our security relationship. Then we moved into the fall where we saw the second hearing on Taiwan, which focused on the members of, or on the administration, where they came to testify, both someone from the State Department and the Department of Defense, where they got asked some very tough questions from supporters. Once again, Congressman Ed Royce right there asking the tough questions, making statements in support of Taiwan. And then almost immediately following that was an original co-sponsor of something that we've been working on for almost a year now, which was the Taiwan Policy Act of 2011. And that is a clarification and a strengthening of the existing Taiwan Relations Act. Now, it doesn't change the act, it clarifies what's going on with that act. So we really need to express our appreciation for the Congressman's support of that important legislation, and it will probably be up next week with markups, etc. And then the next thing that the Foundation has on our agenda is something that I know is important to all of you. December 1st, we will be in Washington, D.C. at the Capitol hosting an event called Ensuring Free and Fair Elections in Taiwan 2012. The reason that that's so important, of course, I'm sure each one of you has seen this despicable article that appeared in the New York Times called "To Save Our Economy, Ditch Taiwan." Now, every credible person in Washington actually thought it was a joke. They were like, they could not believe that the New York Times ran such an insane story, basically. But I always kind of like to see these kinds of things. Even though they're upsetting, they're also very helpful for us to get people rallying around the point of, one, Taiwan's democracy is incredibly important to the United States, and for us to articulate that. So it gives us an opportunity to do that. It also gives us an opportunity to talk about this upcoming election and why we want to ensure that it's free and fair, and we'll be doing that December 1st. So our final thing that I would like to do is just run a very short video. It was filmed this summer when we were in Washington, and I think you'll see some familiar faces in it because we filmed a portion of it right here. It's our message about what the Foundation does. Roll it, Iris.
Given that the meeting has done 1,400 visual statements, I got my pleasure of calling upon the Obama administration to authorize conversations.
Foundation is a non-profit organization speak out loud to you that helps everyone from any of
Here I'm going to be a single event at a single point in time. We're going to be launching point.
Well, thank you. I know the sound wasn't all that great. We were trying to improvise here this morning. And big thanks to our partners, as always, the Taiwan Center, for all their help. And thank you all for coming. So I will turn the stage back over to Wendell.
Well, I'm supposed to introduce Congressman Ed Royce. If I tell you what he has done for Taiwan, I have a whole list, and I don't think I will be occupying all the time. So I will just tell you very briefly. I think very few of us know that the congressman has been in politics since 1982. He has been in Congress alone for 20 years. He's a member of the Foreign Financial Service Committee, in the Foreign Relations Committee. He is the chairman of the Subcommittee of Terrorism. And he's also the senior member of the Subcommittee on Asia and the Pacific. Based on the ratings I have read, and actually also based on some of the conversations I had with him before, he's a fiscal conservative, a social conservative, and he's also pro-military. To me, that's important because my son is in the army. There are two things about Congressman many of you might not know. In about 1992, the Taiwanese American Citizens League started a summer political internship program. And Congressman's office is one of the first ones which let us send our intern to his office. And as I remember, one of the first interns we sent to his office was Becky Yang, Garvin's daughter. And Becky told me, I remember, Becky told me when she first went to the office, the congressman was in Washington, D.C. But when he came back to Cerritos, at that time he was in Cerritos, he spent about half an hour with Becky. And Becky was telling him about Taiwan, about how Taiwanese Americans feel about the U.S. and about China. And I remember Becky said, right, she also suggested the congressman sponsor one of the resolutions circulating in the Congress now. And Congressman said immediately that he would sponsor the resolution. And one thing particular that really showed how much the congressman supports Taiwan was, I think it was in maybe mid-90s. A lot of congressmen, there was a delegation of the members of Congress who went to China. Congressman Royce, and I think two others.
And my wife, Marie.
They went to China after 10, but maybe 14 hours flight. They arrived in Peking. Immediately, they turned around. They went to Taiwan to see Li Wei for about an hour. And then he went back to Beijing to join the delegation. That shows how much support he had for Taiwan. I think with that, I don't have to say anything more. And let's just welcome the congressman.
I remember Becky was very talkative. But I also wanted to share with you, Michelle Lowe was from Cerritos. She went to Whitney. She had been born in Taiwan.
Oh.
And Michelle was one of my interns, and she later, I hired her, and she did some of my foreign policy work in Washington, D.C. But today I have Elizabeth Payne with me, who served on my staff. If you'd like to stand up for a minute. So let me begin by thanking all of you, thanking Terry for being invited back. And I would also make the observation, which I've made before, Taiwanese Americans should be pretty proud, because you've seen something in 2 generations where your country has gone from poverty to prosperity. You have seen a country that went from autocracy to democracy. And it's something to take pride in. And now as Americans, I know you take pride in seeing that Taiwan is safe. And we haven't done enough, in my opinion, to articulate the message that a free, democratic, prosperous, strong Taiwan is in the interest of the United States. And that's one of the things that we all need to keep in mind and need to communicate, because many Americans don't understand Taiwan's role in the world. If you consider for a minute that our 9th strongest trading partner has the 26th largest GDP in the entire globe, if you consider that it has one of the largest ports in the world, if you think about the strategic position along the major commercial lines, you will realize that Taiwan is a major player, and Taiwan is of great significance, not just to the U.S., but we're on the Pacific Rim in California. It's a major player for us here in Southern California. It's at the crossroads of the global supply chain. Taiwanese companies have become critical suppliers to American companies like Apple, and Dell, Hewlett Packard. If you have an iPhone, if you have a PDA, it was probably assembled in Taiwan. So Taiwan's successful democratic transition is important, of course, not only to us, it's an important example to the rest of the world. It's an important example to Asia. It's a country, and I would say it's one of the few, that has gone from U.S. aid recipient to an international provider of aid, and it has peacefully transformed, of course, from an authoritarian to a democratic nation. So it's a true responsible stakeholder on the world stage, and I think we should all recognize that. Now, 2 years ago, I had the opportunity to address a Formosa Forum in Washington, D.C. And as I said, it's always nice to be invited back. There have been a lot of talk about U.S.-Taiwan relations since I spoke in Washington. This year, the House Foreign Affairs Committee had held the first hearings on Taiwan policy in 7 years. This isn't something that the administration welcomed, I can assure you. And frankly, it's something the other party ducked. So hats off to the leadership of Chairwoman Eliana Ross-Lehtinen that they took place. She and I supported these hearings, and together we share a vision of partnering with a prosperous and peaceful Taiwan at peace with its cross-border neighbor. Our timing for today's discussion is good. This weekend, President Obama is in Hawaii for the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Forum, and leaders of all 21 major Asian economies will meet in Honolulu. And the good news is that Taiwan is participating as a full member, as it has from the beginning. We'll likely see a picture in the newspaper of the leaders. They'll be dressed in Hawaiian shirts, I guess. But take a closer look, and you'll likely see that there's something wrong in that picture, besides the funny Hawaiian shirts, you will notice that although Taiwan is a full member, it is once again being represented by a former vice president at this weekend summit, not the president. And this has been a serial situation, okay? And of course, U.S. policy actively discourages visits to U.S. soil by senior Taiwanese officials. Here we are, in the middle of a global recession, trying to break down barriers to trade, trying to jumpstart economic growth, and the head of our 9th largest trading partner is sidelined. And to me, there's no better representation as to how outdated and wrong our Taiwan policy is. Or consider the administration's effort to cast the United States as Pacific power. Secretary Clinton recently wrote a story, cover story, for Foreign Policy magazine, and it was entitled America's Pacific Century. And in it, the Secretary argues that America has to be linked to Asia's growing, dynamic economy, and I have no argument. There's no argument for me in that. But her 8-page article, where every country from Brunei to Mongolia is cited, doesn't contain a single mention of Taiwan. Our discussion today also comes as a debate, is bubbling in certain academic circles about ditching Taiwan. According to this thinking, the U.S. should consider backing away from Taiwan, therefore removing the friction between the U.S. and China and smoothing the way for better relations for years ahead. Fortunately, I can report that no serious member of Congress is considering such a proposal. Would sacrificing Taiwan result in China taking a firmer line on North Korea? No. No. Or Iran's nuclear programs? Of course not. More likely, China would conclude that the U.S. is weak and can be manipulated. The Chinese would pocket our concession, the Chinese government, and move on. This hypothesis also fails to understand the role that the U.S.-Taiwan relationship plays in the region. When the U.S. responded to the 1996 Taiwan Strait crisis, the region's confidence in the U.S. soared, and a wave of counterbalancing occurred. And Japan and Singapore and the Philippines and other nations all bolstered their security ties with the United States. Letting our support for Taiwan slip would likely have the opposite effect, and that would negatively impact our relations with treaty allies and the countries of Southeast Asia, who are worried about freedom of navigation, and they're worried of source claims to the South China Sea and how those are resolved. So put simply, U.S.-Taiwan relations are a barometer of the U.S. role in Asia. It is also interesting to note that tensions between China and its neighbors have heightened at the same time that cross-strait relations with Taiwan have been on more even keel. And this undercuts the theory that China's dispute with Taiwan is the only thing standing in the way, for China on the world stage. I think members of Congress understand the abandoned Taiwan hypothesis is naive. And it also ignores our historic ties and the critical role the U.S. has played in bolstering Taiwan's democratic system as an example for Taiwan's neighbors, for the region. But bad ideas have a way of creeping into the mainstream. So I raise it as a rallying point to challenge for all of us here, all of us that care about this relationship, that we need to work even harder as we move relations forward. This talk of abandonment needs to be stopped out before it gains traction. In arguing, it's important that we stress our objective of promoting peace and security in the region. No one wants conflict. We want good cross-strait relations. The point is that peace comes through strength. Sacrifice the traditional U.S. relationship with Taiwan, and conflict becomes more likely. That's one of the reasons why I am a supporter of the Taiwan Policy Act of 2011, which I joined Chairwoman Ross Layton in introducing this fall. Understandably, most have focused on the role the bill plays in defensive arms sales to Taiwan, but it also does some other things that I want to point out. It encourages visits by U.S. cabinet officials. There have been none since 2000. It requires revisions on travel to the U.S. by Taiwanese officials so that that picture that I mentioned earlier can be corrected. It continues to press on Taiwan's status in international organizations. In other words, Taiwan has become a full member or observer of 8 international organizations in recent years, but it needs to be more. It pushes for Taiwan's inclusion in the visa waiver program once it satisfies the requirements. I am pleased to report that this legislation has been scheduled to be considered by the House Foreign Affairs Committee next Thursday. And I welcome your thoughts today as to how it could be strengthened, how it could be improved. On trade, we talk about that issue. I serve on the Asia Subcommittee, but I chair the Subcommittee on Foreign Affairs that handles the trade issues. The legislation that we're discussing includes provisions that look to bolster U.S. and Taiwan economic ties. I've often said that from the perspective in Asia, the business of Asia is business. Well, a wave of economic integration, which has been underwritten by the U.S. security guarantee, has been sweeping across Asia. Asian countries have been securing preferential trade agreements among themselves and with their trading partners. 180 agreements are currently in force. 20 are awaiting implementation. 70 are under negotiation. And of all these agreements, the United States, we're only a party to 3 of these agreements. Right? Singapore, Australia, and now finally, South Korea. Asia has raced forward while the United States has stood still. Like the United States, but for different reasons, Taiwan has been left out of some of this integration as well. To avoid being further under the leadership of both the DPP and KMT, Taiwan has looked across the strait. In the past decade, Taiwan's total trade with China grew by 300%. China-Taiwan negotiations since 2008 have yielded more than a dozen agreements covering economic issues. Most important has been the Economic Cooperation Framework Agreement, and Taipei drove a hard bargain, being cut to advantage. More importantly, Beijing agreed to these negotiations despite Taipei's explicit depiction of ECFA as a springboard for signing free trade accords with other countries. Since conclusion of the agreement, Taipei has launched talks with Singapore aimed at reaching a free trade agreement that could be the first of many which would help Taiwan to diversify its economic relationships and break through its isolation from regional trade liberalization. As one prominent observer said last week, this was a senator, Senator Lieberman, Taiwan's commerce with mainland China is arguably now freer than its trade with the United States. Now, I don't know about you, but that just doesn't sit right with me. The U.S. must move towards a free trade agreement with Taiwan. Overall, U.S.-Taiwan economic relations have generally been moving in the right direction. Taiwan has stepped up to its protection of intellectual property rights. Taiwan was removed from the Special 301 list of countries that was in January 2009. In July of 2009, Taiwan joined the WTO's Government Procurement Agreement, the GPA, which gives U.S. firms access to a procurement market estimated at about $6 billion. And I have legislation pressing China to join the GPA because otherwise China will continue its predatory economic policies. If it has to join the GPA, it has to reform those predatory policies. Unfortunately, when I confront U.S. officials about the need to deepen our economic agreement with Taiwan, they point to narrow, politically charged issues like U.S. beef exports as holding up progress. Keep in mind, beef represents less than 1% of our bilateral trade relationship, and yet we put ourselves in a position where we undermine entire U.S. economic interests. Issues surrounding beef imports have affected other trading partnerships in Asia, but only with Taiwan did the U.S. make the decision to suspend our entire trade dialogue over that issue. The last Trade and Investment Framework Agreement talks, the main forum used by Taiwan in the United States to discuss our major economic issues, were held in 2007. So now we're approaching 2012, right? This is our 9th largest trading partner. We're talking about refusing to talk about the broad range of economic issues between us because of a few distinct issues can only be described as shooting ourselves in the foot. And this is an important check on the rhetoric we're hearing from the President in Asia this weekend and this coming week. Again, with South Korea, with Japan, think about this for a minute. We were able to make broad progress by compartmentalizing the beef issue. We should be able to restart the progress toward a free trade agreement with Taiwan. This is a win-win. We can do this. Of course, South Korea, that took leadership. The agreement with Japan, took leadership. And neither the Bush nor Obama administrations have held high aspirations for this U.S.-China relationship, U.S. Republic of China relationship with Taiwan. U.S.-Taiwan relations are viewed as a subset of the wider U.S.-China relations. For the administration, this is a relationship that they seek to manage rather than to guide. Looking forward, as Taiwan, the U.S., and China will all go through soon leadership changes, right? We're going to see leadership changes on all fronts. It's going to require hard work on the part of many, including those of you in this room, to do our small part to make sure that this dynamic and this situation changes, and that the picture of U.S.-Taiwan relations is righted, is corrected. But I'm sure everyone is up to that task, and I appreciate the opportunity to be asked to speak here today about some of those challenges, about some of these issues. With that said, Terry, did you want me to take some questions?
Yes, that would be wonderful.
Or any comments that anyone would like to share? I'd be happy